All right, we have a new video here from Eisen. He's talking about things that I also kind of agree with. It's called The War Within is still missing something, and he's referring to spec reworks. You know, they've done reworks for some of them, for some of the classes, but if you are a Shadow Priest, for instance, it's going to be very hard for you to get into Mythic Plus. I'm not going to lie. When I list my key and I see them, I don't pick them. I don't pick them because I've heard nothing but bad news. That they aren't strong enough, that they take too long to ramp. You know, I don't worry about PI. Yeah, so I'm not even looking at that as being one of the great things that they can bring to the party, as well as Fort, you know, because you can just pick up a Disc Priest or a Holy Priest. So let's get into what he's going to be talking about and see what it is.
An interesting thought has come on to recently. This is due to the fact that as we have gotten the Turbo Boost event midway through 11.1.5 and 11.1.7, we also got another round of balance tuning, which is about to go live. Now, while the balance tuning itself has been happening, reasonably often enough, there is another question that players have been posing more and more often, especially to some of the more underperforming or simply underplayed specs right now, which is the difference compared to especially the last expansion, Dragonflight, when it comes to the balance tuning of the specs versus the reworks of the specs. Back in Dragonflight, between the duration of the Dragonflight expansion and the release of the War Within, you had things like the full rework of Rogues happening mid-season, mid-expansion. You had things like the full rework of the 3 Paladin specs happening halfway through Dragonflight. You had a lot of general talent trees being fully reworked throughout the expansion. Meanwhile, since the War Within launched, we have gotten the latest one was the generic talent tree of druids to be reworked. This was basically the last one of the class talent tree left from being reworked, as well as prior to them you had the shaman one, their general talent tree being changed in season 1. And as far as specific spec reworks go, then we had the Undermined patch, the season 2 patch rework of Marksmanship Hunter, which even with the rework didn't really actually change much of how Marksmanship plays anyways. So the question is, compared to Dragonflight, where have all of the reworks gone? All of the turning an entire spec upside down compared to what we have used to see now in Dragonflight. Now, we might have already have the answer. Honestly, this video is about to be very short if the answer very simply is, well, now we have hero talents. A lot of the attention, a lot of the development time of Blizzard didn't really go into the big picture of the talent tree, but rather on the smaller picture of the hero talents. Because if we have seen some major overhauls of talents, it was basically hero talents. You have gotten the mage hero talents, especially Spellslinger and Sun Fury being changed multiple times. You had just recently the full rework of a couple of the hero talents of Hunter, Dark Ranger and Pack Leader. Early on in the expansion you had the one changing the Warlock hero talents, especially Hellcaller and Diabolist. So if anything more so than quick and often happening balance tuning, we had more often and changing hero talents.
And they're still trying to work on this. Is really what he's referring to. Like, they're trying to get everyone that's playing your cookie cutter hero talent, they're trying to get the other one to be competitive. And, like Destruction Warlock, right? They just got another buff for a talent that they don't play because they didn't balance it right. They didn't test it right. And here we are. How many months now? Like, we're going into month 6 of the patch. Am I right? Or 3? It could be month 3. It's what I'm saying. It's still not done. I mean, but even since the beginning of the expansion, it's still not hitting right. These classes need to be. How would you say? Like I know when you look at the tier list, everybody's in a really good spot. Everyone's in a really good spot when you look from top to bottom. how close everyone is to being at the same damage. I think it's like a 4% difference between top to bottom. So they're trying, but that's because everybody's still picking and not doing their own homework on it, because there's just too many numbers. It's so complicated. It's just, you know, you could read all the tooltips you want. You could look at everything that your guy, and you could go hit the test dummies all you want. But unless you actually make that effort, you're just going to go to a website, Wowhead, Archon, Murloc.io, Raider.io, and you're just going to look at the people that are leading, and you're just going to use their spec. Now, are you going to know that the one guy that picked this certain ability, he actually had a reason for that, but otherwise it wouldn't be in like his total talent build for all of the dungeons. He picked it for one specific reason, but you're not going to know that because you don't know what they all do.
Tuning. However, this still left behind the excitement, the notion of reading some Blizzard blue post pointing out that, for example, for 11.1.7 or 0.5, we were going to get a full overhaul of the talents of warriors, for example, or of all of the talents of druids, for example.
You need more singing.
The exact same thing we had the last expansion. 0.5 or 0.7 patches bringing you the overhaul to rogues or the overhaul to paladins, something that we haven't gotten in this expansion. You know, while the balancing of specs can be close to being very good or very even, it's not that this season, for example, in the raid there is a massive imbalance of specs with some very clear super performers, 10-15% even DPS ahead of others, for example. If you look at the raid right now...
Here, this is what I was talking about. Now, this is what he has for raid, right? Or is this... Oh, damage. All bosses, mythic, DPS, all item levels. Let's see. Let's see what he says.
For example, the bottom performance, their average DPS is 2.5 million DPS, whereas the currently best overall performer, Devastation.
Which is plenty fine when you're doing, you know, when you're doing 12s and you want to try and, let's say, for instance, you're going to use those cartel chips, yeah? And you want to get those trinkets at a mythic track. So you have to get all the 12s timed. Well, all of these classes, they can do it. All of them. Even augmentation can do it.
Evoker is averaging 2.717 million DPS. So about 220k more DPS than the bottom, which is about like an 8% damage increase from top to bottom of the raid results. So while the balancing actually might be, or definitely is, slightly better, even more close to each other in this season, and the healer balancing is even closer, healers now are quite close to each other, there is still the question of reworks, the question of certain specs, even if their performance is okay. Many players have not been very satisfied by the way the spec plays, by the way the talents have been not changing for quite a while. For example, specs like Subtlety Rogue, specs like Shadow Priest, specs like BM Hunter, or problems about target capping, limiting certain...
Yeah, the target capping, that... If you're going to... You see, Blizzard, they target capped, then they removed the target cap, and then they reinstituted some of them for some of the classes. Why? It makes no sense. You don't want people to be using all these add-ons, so the only reason they're using the add-ons is because things aren't going to be dying that fast, so that they can make sure they're kicking the right spell. Therefore, they might need another add-on to see what kind of dot they might have. The game, when it comes to all the information that you're supposed to be intaking, for the normal Joe, for the average Joe, they don't give a fuck about any of that stuff, man. They just want to play. You know, just play. You know, I had somebody in one of my comments of the videos, they're like, I don't want to. This is why I stopped doing 12s. I stopped doing 12s because it's just dog shit. Now, was he referring to his class? Was he referring to the dungeon? He didn't really elaborate. But I'm just trying to be a man of the people and say, when it comes to somebody trying to get into Mythic Plus, not everybody wants to go pushing past 12. One of the things that I do like is that with the turbo boost, and now we're getting these cartel chips, and now you're getting this head enchant from visions, and then you tack on another 12% that you're getting from doing your raid weekly. That's a huge amount of damage, to the point where you're pushing bosses out of faces way sooner. You're being able to complete a lot of the content in 3/4 of the time versus the full hour and a half that you would need. You could complete it in like an hour 15, an hour. And that's great when you're just trying to get through because we're so far in. Even if I understand correctly, this season is not supposed to end until like early August. So maybe by that time, maybe by the end, I'll have an alt that I actually start playing. But up until this point, I have like one more piece that I need from Vault, which is the helm, and then maybe I'll work on the tanking set and start going that route. I don't know.
AoE options, for example, of warrior specs in Mythic Plus. We have been missing, this excitement of checking out the PTR in the new build, to see all of the changes about to come for a new spec, to see how could the spec change, whether or not hopefully the changes for the specs were going to be positive or negative, which is something we had in Dragonflight and we are missing now. If you compare the differences, it's quite a leap. In Dragonflight we went from having 3 new specs being released, 2 at the beginning and then augmentation later on, plus multiple reworks of multiple specs. Meanwhile, this expansion we got no new specs and no new class, of course, and also basically no proper reworks to any of the specs. So it is a wonder if we had to find the fault, if we had to point the finger at someone, it might have to be the hero talents, taking away development time from Blizzard, now being busy balancing not just the talents, not just your normal talent tree, but also your hero talent trees. If that might have been the cause of...
Yeah, it was hard enough for Blizzard just to balance the classes without any of that. And then they decided, hey, why don't we just add these hero talents? Well, because you had a hard time with the other thing. Sometimes they'd put 1 step forward and 2 steps back, because they just keep shooting themselves in the foot. For instance, I had a guy that just came back to the game. He said his item level was 547. So he's wearing gear that's probably from Dragonflight, if I had to think about it, because my alts are at like 636 and 635 and shit like that. So this guy's like 100 item levels below me, and I haven't played these guys in this season. So I'm really curious, really curious. So anyways, what I was going to say, he asked me, he's like, what talent are you playing? I'm like, hero talent. Am I taking Templar or Lightsmith, I believe it is. And I'm like, well, for raid, I looked it up. I'm like, Templar. And for Mythic Plus, I'm playing, yep, Templar. There you go. So, I mean, it's just one guy talking to another. He didn't go look it up. He asked me.
Of fewer amount of large scale reworks to multiple specs. Different players might find problems, they might like a full rework for different reasons. For example, Brewmaster has not been a viable, end game Mythic Plus tank because of their stagger mechanic for a long time. So maybe it's time to come up with a rework for the spec. What about Guardian Druid, who has not really been working as a tank for a long time? What about reworking them?
I don't know, because I have a friend that is 3,500 IO right now as a Guardian Druid. So I think it also depends on the skill of the player.
priests, right? How often are we gonna have holy priests being so weak in Mythic Plus ever since Shadowlands? How about, and this might be a bit too early because they were reworked last expansion, but their constant debate between having half of your talents being for melee healing, half of your talents being for straight up caster is not working. How about we just give up on one of the two? And when we say one of the two is the caster version, and just go full melee healer in a rework. Rogues have been lamenting problems in their rotation very often, especially Outlaw and Sub, despite also being specs reworked in Dragonflight. So there is this question in this expansion, something that stands out compared to Dragonflight. While we might praise that in the end, actually, numbers at hand, the balancing is better. Especially in the raid, the power level of the specs is not nearly as OP as it was, or drastically larger in terms of power from the top to the bottom as it was before. But we have lost this, this excitement mid-season, also to keep things new, to keep things fresh in between the, in between the excitement of a new patch, right? When you feel like you have nothing to do on month 3 or month 4 of a patch. Back then, last expansion, we had full reworks. Yes, you might say, not for the better, since the additions in the last expansion were the mid-season release of Augmentation, as well as the mid-season release of the Holy Paladin rework. Those gave us this, which is not a very fond memory for pretty much any other one of the 5 specs not included in this picture. But besides this unfortunate rework, it's a peculiar thing that we have been missing this in this expansion, something extra to throw at us in these 0.5 and 0.7 patches in between the big ones. Balance tuning by itself is okay, but honestly, when has balance tuning been enough to drastically change the course of a season, right? True. A few weeks ago, with enough nerfs to fire and enough buffs to arcane, you had a swap in Mythic Plus, going from Fire Mage to Arcane Mage. That was a thing. We can say in Season 1, possibly in between the nerfs to Resto Shaman, the very small nerf to Resto Shaman, where more players went over playing Discipline instead of Resto Shaman. That's another one. But for the most part, the damage changes will be,
But I believe those people are always chasing the meta. And that's one of the things that has gotten such a bad rap. One of the things when I'm putting together a group, I don't worry about the meta. I'm just looking at their IO. I'm looking at the latest keys. I use wow.io, and it really opens up like what they've done, how many keys they've done. So I really try to look at the player, see if they're good for the content I'm trying to run. So I don't really care, if they're a pally healer. Like very far and in between do I run with a priest healer, and I very rarely ever run with a disc. If anything, and I'm bringing my friend, he's holy. As far as tanks, I pick all of them. I don't really care as long as they can do the content.
4 or 5% buff or a 4 or 5% nerf. It's not that they will be giving you new talents, move your talent tree around, or significantly change the way you play anyways, which is something that usually happens because of a rework, a major rework, a massive rework of your talents, which we have been missing in this expansion. As I said, we're not quite sure if we have to fully point the finger at the hero talents, draining away development time from having time for reworks. Either way, it is something missing. It is something we wish it was back in this expansion. And again, even better if it is halfway through the patches. If it comes, for example, in 11.2, well, in 11.2 it would have less of an impact. The reason why it would have less of an impact is because 11.2 by itself is already a major patch. 11.2 will give you new Mythic Plus season, new raid, new 30 item levels to farm. Usually in between major patches there is going to be a large amount of balance tuning anyways, a large amount of buffs or a large amount of nerfs anyways that can drastically change the meta, right? So we had no need for major reworks between Season 1 and Season 2 of this expansion to see, for example, Augmentation no longer be meta from Season 1 to Season 2, Enhancement Shaman no longer be meta from Season 1 to Season 2, and Frost Decay no longer be meta from Season 1 to Season 2, as well as Prot Paladin. The only thing that happened is that they were nerfed, and other specs were buffed. So you had no need to add a rework, a full spec rework for all of these changes to happen, because it was a major patch. Where it gets spicier is when the rework happens in between patches, in minor patches, like 0.5 or 1.5 or 2.5 or 0.7, where the season has been out for 2 or 3 months, the meta has stabilized, it has started to get a bit stale, a bit repetitive in what you see being played all the time, and then bam, comes a major rework of a couple of specs or an entire class, for example. That is also something that can make up things a bit more spicy, a bit more entertaining mid-season, when usually things tend to start getting a bit more boring. And it was the point of this video, was that it was a bit curious that we have been lacking these kind of rework compared to the last expansion. So we have been left wondering, and we're still left.
But I think that's because everything is in a good spot. I mean, when you looked at his his breakdown, everything he said 8% within each other. You know, that's, to me, that's not bad.
Wondering without an answer, where have these reworks gone? Who took them? Who took the development time of these reworks for them not to be here in this expansion and this season in particular? With this very difficult to answer question, we are done for today on this Tuesday, still wishing that some of these will come out. Well, at this point in 11.1.7 there is really no hope, as we would have heard something from the PTR, from the notes of the PTR, that Blizzard was planning any kind of major changes to the specs, and we have nothing so far, so we likely won't have any in 11.1.7. Maybe by 11.2 being released, we will hear something in the notes of 11.2 that some specs are planned to get reworks later on in the patch. Maybe in the next season, but it's definitely still a few months away at this point. With this question mark about the situation related to reworks established, it is now time to leave each other on this Tuesday. So we're starting our goodbyes, of course, by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who's been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, the classic, the dog barking symphony outside.
There you go. You have eyes in everybody, but you know, he's talking about reworks. You know, and like you're saying there, Zling, it doesn't really help the people that don't play well, to an effect, because if they don't play well and they feel that they have to swap classes, it's definitely because they think they'll get accepted to more content, or they think they'll be able to do better damage. There's a lot of things coming out. There's one button rotation helper, the he killy add-on, the rotation helper there. I don't know. I kind of feel like I want to do a little bit of take something that's not meta and see if I can get to Keystone Hero, maybe 3K. I'm curious. Hey, Woobsy's wife, how are you? So, hope you enjoyed it. If you like it, leave a comment down below. Give it a thumbs up. Subscribe. Until next time, everybody, I'll see you. Yeah, that's all I got. Have fun.